There had been a lot of talk around the AIFF finally releasing a tender for the Indian Super League's commercial rights, but the fact that the tender failed to attract even a single bid was, in hindsight, something that was always likely to happen, given that there were a number of issues with the tender that made it pretty much a no-go for a lot of investors. In this video, we're going to look at 5 major reasons as to why it is that the AIFF's tender was always something that was destined to fail and something that needs to be reworked if you are to have an ISL for this season and, of course, the coming seasons as well. Reason number 1: an overambitious financial model, and one that would see the AIFF get a lot of money but not necessarily invested in a sustainable manner. Now, first off, look at this. The AIFF was demanding a fee of at least rupees 37.5 crores or 5% of the revenues, depending on which was higher in that particular year. But the actual amount that the AIFF would be actually taking from this investor, whoever got the rights, was much higher. Estimations say that the minimum amount would actually be close to rupees 200 crores per year, which is basically 200 crores of money that whoever was investing in the rights would never get to see again. 200 crores was the bare minimum amount, because the 37.5 crores or 5% of revenues was just the upfront fee. Beyond that, the AIFF mandated that the commercial partners would also invest in and take care of things like grassroots football, promotional events, and taking care of other aspects as well. All of that combined would take it up from 37.5 crores, which is perfectly reasonable, to about 200 crores a year, which is a pretty big sum and a lot of money to be pumping in to a league which, truth be told, didn't really have much of a major money spinning event, and we'll get to that part in just a bit. And now, reason number 2, and this was something that really would have been a sticking point regardless of whether FSDL came back, Football Sports Development Limited, or if they got new commercial partners. That is, the power would be centralized with the AIFF. Now, one of the major sticking points was that of the governing council, and how it is that the governing council would be looking in this particular event. The governing council would involve 6 members, with the commercial partner getting just 1 seat, but the AIFF would have 2 seats, including 1 seat which would be getting veto power. So not only were the commercial partners outnumbered, they were also disadvantaged because the AIFF would have 1 seat with veto powers, giving them a lot of power. Basically, what the AIFF was asking for is, you pump in the money and let us take the decisions. You have no say in how the decisions are taken. Now, in defense of the AIFF, this is very much down to the Supreme Court mandate, which required that the top league be managed and organized properly by the AIFF. But let's be fair, which private investor will find this sustainable? Which company is going to, okay, we're going to part with 200 crores a year and give it to you guys, but we'll have no say in how is it that things are run? Never going to happen. Needs to be retooled if there is to be a successful taker for the tender. Reason number 3, and this one really, now we're coming down to the bigger details. Reason number 3 is, of course, the issue of promotion and relegation. Now, you remember that the ISL did start a promotion system towards the latter years of the FSDL run era, but there was no relegation. Teams were getting promoted to the top divisions, but there was no real talk of relegation coming about as a major thing. But the fact that the SC, the Supreme Court, mandated that promotion relegation be a thing is in line with FIFA guidelines, but it is a sticking point because whilst they did mandate promotion relegation, the commercial partners were not very happy with this, and the main reason for this was that they were keen on a return of investment first and foremost. The top clubs, the clubs in the top of the ISL, have invested a lot of money, about 5-6 times more money than what any I-League club would have invested. And therefore, they wanted to see some sort of a return, some sort of a safety net before they considered the prospect of relegation. This, unfortunately, was one of the sticking points where finances ended up meeting sporting merit, which is the central idea on how FIFA wants leagues to be governed. Of course, there's wiggle room for this. You know that there are leagues in the world, including the US League and the leagues in Australia, that don't operate with promotion relegation. But this was meant to be a FIFA mandate, which is why the Supreme Court insisted that it be there. But it turned out to be a big sticking point as well. Point number 4, and this one is also important, is that truth be told, the finances of the ISL over the past years do not paint a good picture at all. In fact, the ISL basically operated under massive losses. There was no actual profit that was being made. Yes, revenue was being generated, but there were also big losses. In fact, there's an estimation that Football Sports Development Limited lost about 5,000 crores in 15 years of them investing in Indian football. And what really put investors off was the lack of a viable, sustainable model. Never mind the fact that it could be viable. See, you could be ambitious, but it can also make some degree of sense. There was no hope that the model being proposed would eventually lead to the league paying for itself, never mind becoming profitable. So that was always going to scare off new investors. And the fact is that these old or issues, really, the skeletons in the closets of the ISL finally came back to haunt it. The huge losses were always going to be a major talking point. And number 5, and this one is somewhat hypothetical but can't really be ignored, the national team's poor or mixed form, depending on how it is that you see it. Now, the fact of the matter is that the Indian national team right now is going through a bit of a slump. They've seen a drop in their FIFA rankings. They were previously within the top 100, now comfortably out of that range, and they also failed to qualify for the AFC Asian Cup in 2027. And all these poor showings, what they did was hurt the sport's appeal. And why does I say that is because in India there isn't really a taker for a big league yet. Everything will depend on the success of the national team. Now, if the national team was doing well, then there would be an interest in seeing a league across the nation. Unfortunately, the way things are, whilst football does have its fanatical fan bases in a lot of pockets of the country, the key point is just that they're just in pockets. Mass appeal is something that the sport would need if it is to become commercially viable and, of course, get to a point where the sport can start in making money that is being invested into it back. But the poor showings of the national team pretty much meant that a lot of people have lost interest in watching football, and that could not have helped matters as well. So these are the 5 major big points why it is that the ISL tender failed. Of course, there is hope that they'll rework a lot of these aspects and potentially float a new tender. They have no choice. They need to be holding the top league. But as things stand, the way the tender was proposed, it was never going to have many takers. In fact, there were about 4 investors reportedly interested, but none of them put in a bid. That in itself tells you just how poor it was, because even one bid would have meant that this entire thing would have been solved. But the failure to attract even one bid shows that it was always untenable. You can let us know in the comments below your thoughts on what it is we share in this video, and don't forget, as always, to like it, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel, tap that bell icon, follow us also on social media. We're on Instagram, X and Facebook, and stay tuned for more such updates from the world of sport.